evening's town hall. And so just to kind of get us started, I will walk through just our kind of run of show for the evening. Next slide. Excellent. Thank you so much. And so this evening, we will start with some opening remarks from Assemblymember Bonta, and then we will also go over our amazing legislative package and some of the victories from that, a conversation around gun violence as a public health crisis. We will also discuss the state of California budget wins, as well as specific wins for Assembly District 18. We'll get to engage with all of you for a question and answer, and then some closing remarks from Assemblymember Bonta. So really at this time, I'm really excited to introduce Assemblymember Mia Bonta, who has been serving in the California legislature for just made the 1 year. And we're so delighted to be with you all this evening. So Assemblymember Bonta.
Thank you so much, Rowena, and good evening to everyone. And thank you all for joining this virtual and our very first legislative and budget town hall. Every day, I have the honor to introduce myself as the representative for the beautiful people of Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro in AB 18. And today, I have the honor to share back with you all some of the legislative accomplishments, some of the budget wins, and all of the opportunities that Team Bonta had to work on your behalf with you and in support of you. Upon getting elected and sworn in over a year ago, it was important for me to spend my first legislative session lifting up our collective opportunities, our challenges, and tackling them head on, authoring over 30 bills. And I take pride in being your elected representative in Sacramento and went to work on day one. To start, I prioritized fighting for millions of dollars for affordable housing projects across AB 18, including West Oakland and San Leandro, and for resources to support our unhoused neighbors, seniors, our community members who are still struggling with mental health challenges. I sought funding to revitalize parts of the MacArthur corridor and to channel investments into efforts that will make it easier for more teachers to teach and live in Oakland. And I unapologetically moved legislation that will protect women's reproductive rights and protect the rights of LGBTQ youth and their families to seek out the health care that they deserve. I fought for more resources for cradle to career efforts that are doing the work to nurture our youth and our families on their paths to achieving their dreams, and to push our state to close the digital divide for good. Here in the district, we advocated on behalf of hundreds of constituents needing assistance with unemployment claims, answering over 6,000 constituent emails and phone calls on issues of housing, the eviction moratorium, on liaisoning on their behalf with various state, county, city, and even federal agencies. And we know we're not at the finish line yet this year, this legislative year, with 11 bills still awaiting signature with the governor. So we have a lot of work to do, and we'd love to talk more specifically about some of the legislation that Team Bonta worked on with you all. And with that, Rowena, what's up next for us?
Excellent. So right now we're going to go ahead and move into a conversation about education and some of the education legislation. Next. Excellent. Thank you so much, Monica. So at this time, I'm really delighted to introduce two of our amazing staff, Eliza Brooks, who serves as our legislative assistant, as well as Jackie Pearl, who is our district director, to lead us in this conversation. Eliza.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Rowena, for that warm introduction. I'm Eliza Brooks, and I'm honored to staff Assemblymember Bonta on her education portfolio in her Capitol office. So we'll start with AB 2517. AB 2517 will establish a 3-year grant program to fund organizations providing place-based services to children and families from before birth through college and career. This bill is currently on the governor's desk awaiting his signature. Assemblymember, can you talk about your experience with Cradle to Career programs like Oakland Promise and why you're passionate about this legislation?
During my time leading up to joining the legislature, I had the privilege of being the founding CEO of Oakland Promise. And that was really, and the work that I'd done previously was really where I had an opportunity to think about the importance of cradle to career work, because when you invest in babies and you make sure that you build a community that knows and tells every child that they have an opportunity to succeed, and where you make investments in their college education, their educational careers along the way, and provide those wraparound services, and you do that in a place-based manner, research shows us that it leads to incredible benefits and outcomes for children. So when given the opportunity to help Oakland shine by bringing forward that place-based model that we've been able to enjoy here in Oakland, we took it with AB 2517 and the incredible champions across the Promise neighborhood universe that we were able to work with on that one.
Excellent. And was there another, did you want to go to the next slide as well?
Our next bill is AB 2465. AB 2465 would have established the Family Literacy Innovation Project, a grant program to be administered by the California Department of Education, which local educational agencies can apply to support the goal of ensuring that all of our students across the state of California are able to read by 3rd grade, and engaging our families and communities in that process. While this bill did not move past the Senate Appropriations Committee, we're very pleased to share that this grant program was incorporated into the education trailer bill, which was a major victory. Assemblymember, you have said before that literacy is the key to equity. Can you expand on this statement and share why increasing access to education is important to you?
I think AB 2465 is a perfect example of what it means to be able to really focus in and push, as we did through legislation, family literacy in this instance, and the idea of equity through literacy. And it's also a really great example of what happens when you push, and the governor's office and team and our fellow legislators really say it makes a lot of sense. So in this instance, we were able to get the job done by making sure that family literacy and literacy initiatives were absorbed into the budget. So the bill went away, but the work got done. And for me, and I'm sure every person on this call who's an educator, a parent, or somebody who's gone through a struggle with literacy knows that that literacy is the cornerstone of making sure that we have access to learning, to our jobs, to our ability to participate fully in our community. So for me, it's the cornerstone of our work. And I'm really glad we got to focus on it this year with Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, and so many of our literacy champions in the district.
That's so phenomenal. And just so that everyone knows, C. Lynn, who's on our staff, has been dropping in, the links to some of the bill language in case you want to read it. Additionally, in the bottom right-hand corner of our PowerPoint slide, you can also scan the code there, and it will take you to that very specific piece of legislation. Next slide. Excellent. And did you also want to add on this one as well, Eliza?
Our next bill is AB 2880. When we know that students are continuing to struggle with student loan debt, we introduced AB 2880 to extend supplemental Cal Grant funding. This bill is on Governor Newsom's desk awaiting signature.
Phenomenal. And then next slide. And so I'm really excited. I know Jackie would love to hear from you. And additionally, we do have, 2 amazing special guests with us. Pakoya, who's the Executive Director of Bay Area Plan, as well as Kira Mangia, appointed OUSD District Director for District 6, who will also be joining in on this conversation around AB 1912. But Jackie first.
Yes, hello. Yes, I had the pleasure of working with our team to respond to what we're noticing is that, an ongoing theme of school closures. And we developed AB 1912 this year, particularly thinking about schools that are under financial distress and duress, to make sure that, when we're making decisions about closing schools, that districts are using a set of equity metrics to determine not only the fiscal impacts and savings, but also the impacts that these types of closures will have on the communities that are often non-tangible or often not quantified. So trying to actually trying to measure that impact. And before I hand over to our guests, I just wanted to ask our assembly member why you think it's important that equity be factored into making decisions about school closures.
I think for far too long, all the tools that we've been giving school boards is really one of bottom line dollars and cents, instead of thinking about the heart and soul of what schools are to our communities, and to recognize that our schools are in many ways the lifeline to resources for our students, particularly in a district like Oakland, where we've built up a community schools. We've created an opportunity for and knowledge that, our schools became our health centers, they became our food centers, and there are learning centers, that it's really important for us to be able to give the school board across the state, and certainly in our district, as we were going through the reality of school closures, tools to be able to make sure that equity and an assessment that the school board and school district could be accountable to around the impacts of school closure, and this equity assessment would allow us to be able to have. So this bill, AB 1912, is a small step along the path that many have taken. It's a step, I believe, in the right direction, and that's all it is, a step, and we have a lot more work to do as it relates to educational equity.
Excellent. And Bukolia, would you like to add something additional? So glad that you're here with us.
Yes, and thanks so much, Assemblymember Bonta, for lifting up that this is just a step. One of the things I want folks to know is that, what is happening in Oakland is very much a microcosm of what could happen across our state. And I think that is, putting school boards in a situation where they're being told by our state law that they have to have a balanced budget, and then providing them very limited opportunities to be able to resolve those things. So as someone, who has been pushing for positive transformation in our public education system for over 25 years, I've seen over and over again our systems and our districts have to kind of go through this problem. So what's so amazing about AB 1912 is that it really does take an extra step and say, hey, as a state, we want our districts to look at more than just balancing the budget, and really be able to look at how we are impacting painfully, potentially, our students and our communities. And I think that the pain that Oakland has experienced may be the last if we use this opportunity in the most strategic way possible to push forward. So appreciate the assembly member, and just also want to give a round of applause, because it takes a lot of courageousness to be able to say that balancing the budget is possible to be done in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Kira.
Yeah, I too just want to echo my gratitude and thanks, Assemblymember Bonta and the whole team, for your leadership on literally everything, but especially on AB 1912, which, as everyone has already said, helps ensure that school districts have to look at the impact that school closures have on students and the larger community, but especially taking into account that equity impact in its decision-making. I think one of the challenges that we've seen locally and in other districts is that too often the processes and the decisions and the decision making pre-AB 1912 have not included those equity impact analyses, have not been inclusive, and have not been as transparent as they could be. And this legislation not only gives us an opportunity, but ensures that we are keeping our students, keeping our families, and keeping our communities at the center of our decision-making, so that everyone in a district can receive the quality education that they deserve. And so just thank you for this. I'm really excited about what it means.
So phenomenal. We're education advocates here, yes. And so I would love to go ahead and move us along to our next section. So next slide. And so while before I kind of intro this, I do want to highlight that if anyone has any questions, that as we're kind of flowing through this discussion, please feel free to send me your question in the chat. And then either I can ask it real time or towards the a little later on in our town hall during the question and answer section. And so now we're going to kind of go into a conversation around just social justice advocacy, reproductive justice, and I get to introduce two more of our amazing staff. So Heidi Dominguez, who is an attorney here in our office, legislative aide to Assemblymember Bonta, as well as Anthony Amons, who serves as our assistant to Assemblymember Bonta, to lead us in a conversation related to just overall social justice equity. Anthony.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us here, first of all. We're going to talk about AB 1706 and why this cannabis automatic resentencing is important. As you can see, a lot of the urban neighborhoods get, as you are arrested for cannabis, you get the felony on your record. Now, once you get the felony on your record, that makes it harder for you to get a job. And as it's harder for you to get a job, you begin to go back to the streets and start to struggle more, which makes you hurt your community more than you helped it. So we want this to take that off of people's records so that people have a better shot at a career and opportunity, so that they can be better productive citizens in our community. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and were you also going to segue into AB 2361 as well?
Exactly. And I wanted to talk about AB 2361, which is near and dear to my heart, about juveniles being seen. And yes, they committed crimes. At the same time, they should be treated like children and given the opportunity to grow as children. And that way, again, they'll have a better shot at coming out and being better productive. I'm sweating, I'm sorry, nervous. They'll be better productive citizens of our community as well. That way they don't feel alienated by our community, but helped by our community. So I do have a personal question to my boss, Assemblymember Bonta, who believes in careers. Why is it so important that you believe in second chances?
I think, thanks, Anthony, for the question. I believe in second chances because I fundamentally believe in our opportunity to have and seek redemption. I think many people who know me well know that I had an opportunity to take one path that led to incredible educational institutions. And there were those in my community growing up in New York City who didn't have that. And when you meet folks like we have on our team, and like Anthony, you're an amazing example of that, you know that it's possible to be able to have challenges when you are younger and you feel like you don't have so many options. And unfortunately, because our carceral system is the way that it is, those could be life altering forever, and without any opportunity for something different in one's life. So AB 2361 and 1706, combined with the support of the Last Prisoner Project and the Pacific Juvenile Defender Center and the California Public Defenders Association, were two pieces of legislation that came to us because they matter in our district and to our community members, and because it gives us an opportunity in our state legislature to give voice and space to folks who are often unseen on the day-to-day. So those, I think, I'm really proud that we were able to have this one, AB 2361, get passed across the governor's desk and signed, and we are looking, and actually 1706 as well. So so really excited that the governor's team ultimately resonated with what we were trying to do with these two pieces of legislation.
Phenomenal. And Heidi, did you have, I know you wanted to go into kind of lead us in a conversation around AB 1837. Next slide.
Yes, AB 1837 really centers around preventing displacement and making sure homes are truly prioritized for our community members. Unfortunately, the pivotal law that was already passed in this space is being misused by private corporations who want to continue to seek to profit off of families. And so what Assemblymember Bonta's legislation, AB 1837, does is closes those loopholes that are being misused and make sure that it is truly, these homes are truly prioritized for families and prevents families from continuing to be displaced as they are right now. Before I turn it over to Richmond, to Valerie Jameson with Richmond Land Boss, I wanted to ask you a question. The misuse of the current foreclosure law is so prevalent. It was highlighted in a recent KQED article. Why is it so important for you to author this legislation?
It was important for me because I've heard from so many folks who were wanting to be able to have an opportunity to own their homes, to have a security of a place to be, and because this legislation, AB 1837, is literally ripped from the work and the headlines of our incredible advocacy organizations here in Oakland, like Moms for Housing. We got to partner with the California Community Land Trust Network, and we have Valerie Jameson to talk a little bit about this, but this is a perfect example of folks coming together, identifying an implementation concern around an existing bill, which allowed for corporate, the big corporate landlords to come in and corporations to come in and start buying up property and without recourse, and pushing out and gentrifying our communities here in this district and throughout the state of California. So we need more of this, and I'm looking forward to doing more of it. Would love to hear from Valerie.
Thank you. You opened up the conversation so well around the importance of really delivering on the promise and the work of housing justice advocates and organizers throughout Oakland and beyond. We came to know about the need for a cleanup to SB 1079 through a particular case of a longtime Black homeowner who had been charging below market rate rents. It was a pillar in the community who is at risk of being evicted. And while our city has strong eviction protections, they didn't cover him because he was a former owner. And we came to find out that the purchaser utilized SB 1079, but it was actually a nonprofit private equity partnership where they used an out-of-state nonprofit. They used their tax designation, but it was actually the private investors pulling all of the strings and really essentially operating kind of a house flipping operation and trying to benefit from this legislation that is really meant to create homeownership opportunities, homes for homeowners, not corporations. And so AB 1837, Homes in Community Hands, as I like to call it, is really delivering on that promise. Is providing clear eligibility language, making sure that it's prioritizing resident occupants, and it's making sure that there's local affordable housing nonprofits that are eligible in the First Look program, creating the enforcement measures in place so that we can catch these situations as they come, and making sure that bad actors are not taking advantage of these programs and being ill-intended in them. And that strong level of transparency is really important. And I just want to take the moment to really thank Assemblymember Bonta for being a champion and recognizing the importance and hearing kind of our cries and concerns around all of the work that has stemmed so many different efforts and is built upon so many important legacies of work, and recognizing that this was a common sense piece of legislation, a common sense way of moving the needle on keeping our neighborhoods stable and keeping our communities in place. So really applaud her for being a champion of low-income communities of color that are often most vulnerable to real estate speculation.
Thank you so much, Valerie, for joining us. And Heidi, did you have more that you wanted to add to this discussion?
Yeah, I did want to flag that we are still waiting signature on this bill. So any showing of support would be wonderful as we continue to advocate for this legislation. It wasn't an easy job for the Assembly member to get this to the governor's desk, and we are really pushing to get it signed.
So good. All right, and so next slide. Excellent. I think this is you as well, Heidi.
Yes, and AB 2091 is part of the fight towards making sure that we protect birthing people, women and birthing people's right to make the decision whether or not to have a child. Given the overturning of Roe v. Wade, this became a critical piece of legislation. So what AB 2091 does is make sure that every fundamental's right to reproductive health decisions is protected by protecting their medical privacy. It prohibits healthcare providers, healthcare service plans, contractors, employers from releasing medical information related to an individual who seeks or obtains an abortion in response to a subpoena. It also protects an individual from being compelled to disclose information that would identify an individual who sought or obtained an abortion. In this way, people can seek reproductive health services in California without the fear that their medical information will be disclosed to hostile individuals. And so talking about this, Assembly member, can you talk about your decision to prioritize and champion reproductive health legislation this year?
I am so thankful, and I've never worn more pink in my life than than this year. I think I saw my mother on the line here. When I was 16 years old, she took me down to Washington, D.C., and we participated in a March on Washington to protect a woman's right to choose. And as we know, the Dobbs decision has really made it a situation where we are now, as women and birthing people, second-class citizens. And the reality is that for women of color, especially, this limitation on reproductive rights and our ability to have agency over our bodies is going to have a greater impact. And so I'm very proud of the California State Legislature and the Women's Caucus, especially partnering with Planned Parenthood and Equality California to come together to put forward over a dozen pieces of legislation and some significant resources to make sure that California can be the last stand for reproductive freedom. This particular bill, we won't go into a bunch of detail about it, but we had to work this one really hard. And there is a part of this bill, AB 2091, and the mechanism, the legal mechanism that we're using that I think is going to have far-reaching application across reproductive rights, across our ability, across gender-affirming care, across our ability to have LGBTQ members of our community have privacy in seeking out sensitive services and birthing people as well. So we are ready for the fight this year that we know we will continue to have, and thankfully, because of this legislation and many more that the governor is considering and or has already passed, California is going to be ready. And when I think about our need to make sure that our daughters and our children have their rights protected and that they have fewer rights than I did growing up, it breaks my heart. So, as I'm sure many of you all, it does as well. So, so together, we're going to stand strong on this one.
Absolutely. And so for AB 2091, this one is awaiting signature from the governor. So that is amazing. All right, so next slide. And so now we're going to lead into a discussion, talking about affordable housing. And, most of the questions, most of the previously, submitted questions had to do with housing. It's really top of mind for so many Californians, and especially here in Assembly District 18. And so to lead us in this conversation, I want to introduce Max Michalonis, who is our legislative director, to talk more on some of the amazing legislation that Assemblymember was able to bring forward. Max?
Good evening, folks. I'm Max Michalonis, legislative director here. The members' legislative package include 4 pieces of housing legislation, housing and renters' rights legislation that align with the production of affordable housing and the production of all housing, the preservation of existing housing, and preventing displacement. I know that we've already mentioned AB 1837 earlier, but it's worth re-mentioning that this bill, which is that the member authored with the work with community land trusts, it's about keeping families in their homes, ensuring that renters have a chance to buy the home when it's foreclosed on and not get bought up by a corporation. And so in that sense, it's a homelessness prevention and anti-displacement measure, which is just critical as part of the continuum of housing policy, that it's not enough we need to build, we're also needing to prevent people from becoming homeless again in the first place. The next measure on the homelessness on the housing side was AB 252, the Fling Home Rental and Vacancy Control Act. This bill extends rent control and vacancy control to floating homes and caps increases in birth rent at 5%. Member Bonta, what did you think when you first approached about this bill? And did you have any experiences before this bill about affordability in floating homes?
Absolutely. I mean, we started out our time in the legislature going on a housing tour, and I visited 19 different cities with 23 different legislators, and certainly got to be able to understand the many ways in which we needed to do better in terms of housing production, preservation, and tenant protections within that. And this bill, AB 252, kind of came across our desk later in the legislative cycle. We had to hustle to try to find a vehicle for it. And it came about because we started to get calls from folks in our district in Barnhill Marina who were sharing that their slips were the rental fees for their slips where their boats are housed were going up, 2, 3, 4 times the cost of what they might be able to afford. And in addition to at some point kind of thinking about a floating home being a place where I could have elders in my own family live, it struck a chord because I'd just gotten off the phone when I started, our phones started getting blown up about this one and this need with a woman who shared how she had lived on a floating home, and because her slip rental had increased 3 times and she was on a fixed income and she was an elder, she ended up being homeless and living in her van in the parking lot next to the boat that she could no longer afford. And it took her 2 years to kind of get back on track. And so this one, I think, is a really great example of being able to be nimble as a team in the assembly to come together and be able to try to make some shifts that were really critical in addressing a need where a lot of folks were hurting. At the end of the day, I think this will apply to about 500 different boat slips across the state of California, primarily in Northern California, but that's 500 people who are going to have the security of being in their home. And that to me mattered.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And so,
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, go ahead. Next slide. And I know we've been, sharing out so much information. And so just want to flag for everyone that we do have a Zoom poll to engage you all in this kind of conversation around affordable housing, which I'll launch after this slide, Max.
Great. And then furthermore, of the 4 pieces of housing legislation that Member Bonta introduced, there are 2 more. AB 2319 is on the Surplus Land Act. It provided an exemption from the State Surplus Lands Act for the Alameda Point development, or Alameda Naval Air Station. Development at Alameda Point had stalled after the state approved the Surplus Lands Act because land on Alameda Point that was not necessarily designated for housing, that is part of the agreement between the federal government and the city of Alameda, was going to be used for other purposes, had to be offered up, and that caused a stalling of the Alameda Point development. And so this bill, which is pending before the governor, will go and help jumpstart housing at Alameda Point, and as well as includes strong labor and affordable housing protections in the bill. And then the last housing bill the member introduced about transforming blighted properties into homeownership opportunities, AB 2560, is requiring local governments to plan on how they would address blighted properties in their communities, understanding that addressing blighted properties and returning them to community hands would reduce overall costs to the city, reduce crime and negative impacts. And so this bill was asking cities to take a proactive approach. While this bill did not move forward, we were grateful to be able to work with Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services, and the Richmond Community Foundation and California Community Builders as partners on this legislation to try and help support small developers in positive community redevelopment. Next slide.
Excellent. And so I feel like before you deep dive into this one, I want to launch this Zoom poll. And while you're kind of going over some of this amazing legislation, we can just kind of gauge and see like where our audience, what the audience thinks as far as, what is your top housing priority. So I'm going to launch this poll now. And so the question is, what is your top housing priority? Some of the options: protecting tenants and preventing displacement, building affordable housing, building housing at all levels of affordability, transit-oriented development, and accessory dwelling. And so while everyone is kind of engaging on that poll, Max, would you like to keep the discussion flowing? And all of this is just really good kind of data and information that we can, check to see if we are on the right track, and then also use kind of going forward as well. And so thank you everyone for participating. I'm not sure if I can only see what the results are sharing out, but I will share once it seems like everyone has participated. Phenomenal.
Great. This was a very big year for housing in the legislature, so I just want to touch on some of the other major legislation Member Bonta supported as it moved through the process, such as AB 2011 by Member Wicks, this member just to the north of 8018, the Affordable Housing and High Road Jobs Act 2022, which allowed for redevelopment of commercial centers and vacant commercial properties with a high affordable housing requirement. AB 2097 by Member Friedman for more homes and fewer cars. That bill removed or would remove minimum parking requirements from housing and affordable housing that's near transit, so that we can build homes for people and not need to build more parking spaces. We can use that space and those dollars more efficiently. Additionally, there was SB 886 by Senator Weiner. This addressed one of the issues seen up at UC Berkeley, where the university was being sued under CEQA for building housing and having expanded housing there for students. And ultimately, there should be more homes for students, and our environmental laws shouldn't be used to block that as needed. And then lastly, SCA 2 by Senator Ben Allen. This bill removed barriers to public housing either in the California Constitution that have been in the state constitution for decades. And so this constitutional amendment will be on the ballot sometime in 2024. Additionally, the member co-authored several important housing measures, such as AB 2053, the California Social Housing Act, that would create a state agency to promote social housing, which would be state-owned or run, or essentially a broader scale of public housing in the state. And that would be outside of local land use restrictions. And then AB 854 and AB 2050, which would prohibit Ellis Act evictions, particularly in cities with rent control, such as AD 18. So it was, again, a very big, those two bills, while they did not move forward, they remained in conversation. The member was a co-author and strong supporter of them. So again, a very busy year on affordable housing, in housing in general, and sure that 2023 will be a busy year as well.
And so, and just from the Zoom poll, it shows that kind of top of mind for folks in this Zoom space, building housing at all levels of affordability, kind of ranked in highest, and then followed by protecting tenants and preventing displacement. Assemblymember Bonta, would you like to add some thoughts here?
Well, you know, I think a quick poll is a great thing for us to be able to ground ourselves on. I did want to speak to some of the work that we're doing right now during the interim. We've already met with several groups and our tenant protections advisory group that we were able to launch in addition to some others, and we'll continue to tackle this in a way that is the most helpful for our district. And I see in the chat Tanya Love piping in with some additional an additional thought around supporting the management of unhoused encampments. We know that that's a huge need we have, and also building emergency encampment shelters and making state-owned land available for unhoused services. And so those are all things that we can continue to think about. I was able to have a brief conversation with Councilmember Fife yesterday about reestablishing the redevelopment agency fund. And I think those are all on the table for the ways in which we'll be able to move. I think that this next year, we are going to be very focused on homelessness prevention and tenant protections specifically. So, you know, if you'd like to participate in our advisory groups on that, or support us in our legislation and budget asking over this course of this next year, looking forward to that partnership.
Thank you. And next slide. Okay, excellent. So, so also for this next section, we know that, you know, all of us who kind of live here in, you know, in the city of Oakland, we know that during the pandemic and even before, gun violence has plagued our communities, and we know that during the pandemic, it really was heightened. And so, although he's not here in the Zoom space with us, our Assembly Fellow, Ephraim, worked so hard with so many advocates for reducing gun violence in our communities, here locally, really statewide, and worked really hard on AB 2253. And this piece of legislation was really working to direct, you know, gun violence really being recognized and recognizing it as a public health crisis, and utilizing a public health data-driven strategy, and taking all of this into consideration in order to really get to the root causes of gun violence, while focusing on addressing and healing trauma that's plaguing our communities. And so although, you know, this piece of legislation was not able to move forward, we are still centering this, and I feel like, you know, I have this note here, you know, stay tuned for an announcement on Assemblymember Bonta's social media tomorrow, but I feel like I want to open the space up, kind of to have Assemblymember Bonta kind of share out if you wanted to share this exciting news. And at the same time, I am going to launch a poll, because we want to know, you know, what's top of mind for you all when it comes to reducing gun violence in our community. So I'm going to launch the poll at the same time. to get everyone engaged. And then I know that there was so much work and time and attention on this piece of legislation. Assemblymember Bonta.
Well, this bill, AB 2253, was author sponsored, which means that we just kind of took the information that we had and went out and crafted something that made a lot of sense. And gotta lift up Councilmember Treva Reed in Oakland for really starting to introduce that language of gun violence as a public health crisis to our team, and quite frankly, lift up a lot of the work that is happening here in the East Bay and in Oakland especially. We know that we are plagued beyond what is bearable right now with the impact of violence, you know, in our API community in Little Saigon and Chinatown, and throughout Oakland and Alameda and San Leandro. And we know that the proliferation of guns is a huge cause of that. And we have a lot of legislators who are focused on dealing with the manufacturing and the limitations of guns. I wanted to be able to introduce a conversation around prevention and community supports that we need to have in place that include things like ceasefire and elevating that, and include things like making sure our parks and our lights are on at night so that we can feel free to move around, that include things like building up a cradle to career pipeline so that everybody feels like they have an opportunity, and then addressing the harm that comes with this over proliferation of gun violence caused by the incidence of having too many guns on the streets. So there's a lot of work to do here. I was very, very sad to see a critical piece of legislation around concealed carry weapons not pass in the 11th hour on the last day of the legislative cycle. And we'll continue to fight on this because it's so critical for our district and for the state. And while just the way that things go, this legislation we worked really hard on in terms of introducing an Office of Gun Violence that would sit in the California State Attorney General's office. You know, didn't happen in Assembly appropriations, but the seedling of the idea was something that is actually going to result in having an Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the Attorney General's office. And we're going to announce the opening of that office tomorrow. So you know, laws work in mysterious ways, but we're thankful that we have the outcome that we wanted.
And like, I think that is such like huge news because we know here in the city of Oakland, there's the Department of Violence Prevention. Now just some and all the incredible work that they've been able to do here locally. And now just imagine this at this like statewide at the statewide level. And I feel like this really leads us into a good discussion to go over some of the budget wins, because in the Zoom poll, it shows here that just what's really top of mind for folks here in this Zoom: mental health services, grant funding, and as well as, you know, more research in figuring out the root causes. And so I would love to go ahead and introduce, to kind of lead us as our budget expert, our chief of staff here in Assemblymember Bonta's office, Tamasa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Verena, for that very lovely introduction. So just to give a very high level overview of the budget, this was the first major budget that the Assembly member had an opportunity to vote on and engage in. And to give you a sense of what we were dealing with, our budget was looking very good this year, so good that we actually allocated $300 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars of state funding to various programs throughout the state. So as our economy gets better and we have more money to go around, there's more ask to be made, and with finite numbers, we really pushed hard for some very major victories for the district. So just to quickly talk about some Assembly District 18 victories. This year, we're seeing millions of dollars that are going to the city of Oakland for various park improvement projects, which is great, because the nicer our parks are, that means the more that our kids can get outside and play and burn some energy. $5 million, which is going to the California Science Center Foundation for the Air and Space Center. We have $250,000 going to the Oakland Museum, and then nearly $22 million to Alameda County to continue restoration projects for the Alameda Creek. Moving on to victories that Assemblymember Bonta was very played a major role, and had she not advocated, I know for sure none of this would have happened. Going back to her job as CEO of Oakland Promise, one of the things that the Assemblymember was really championing us and talking to us about was the need for child savings accounts. And the governor agreed with her so much so that he created a statewide program, which is the California Kids Investment and Development Savings Program, which is CalKids. But one of the faults that we found is that we have these local child savings account programs that aren't necessarily talking to the statewide program, and vice versa. And so she championed for $5 million to go towards local child savings account programs to be able to do outreach and coordination with the statewide program, so that more families know about these savings account, more families can get their children signed up, and more families can have money set aside for their children should they choose to go on to college. Going in alignment with her work on focusing on criminal justice and rehabilitation, we were able to secure $20 million, what we are calling to the right grant, which is going to help with capacity building and support for community-based organizations to go into prisons across the state and do evidence-based rehabilitative programming to incarcerated individuals. Again, touching on her experience as a CEO for Oakland Promise, she secured $127 million to the Workforce Development Board for the Early Learning and Care Workforce Development Grant. And what this money is going to go for is for early educators to be able to do professional development or take advantage of training that will then allow them to offer the highest quality of care and support for all children. Dear to her heart is $5 million for Teachers Rooted in Oakland. This is a project out of Mayor Schaaf's office, and what this money will be used for is to provide subsidized housing for STEM and special education teachers, and then also provide stipends for teachers who agree to commit to working for at least 4 years in Oakland Unified, which is a way to retain high quality teachers in Oakland, where there is the highest need for those types of teachers. And then touching on what Rowena had said earlier, we did secure $1.8 million to the city of Alameda for their care team. And this is a 24/7 based service that provides alternative responses to nonviolent individuals that are facing mental health crisis, so that it's a community-based reaction, not law enforcement reaction to individuals in crisis.
Well, thank
Next
you.
slide.
I just wanted to hit on the other slide for a second. If you can go back one, I'll just provide a little bit of a voiceover here. Again, like I think one of the opportunities that we have as a legislator, legislator that I've had was to go and fight for funding, and specifically very excited about our opportunity to support Alameda's version of the macro program that is in Oakland, and really creating an alternative to policing response and creating a different kind of first responder program. And that's born out of a pilot program that the firefighters really championed in the city of Alameda. And super excited that Kira Mungia is still on the line with TRIO and the work to really be able to build out a residency program and workforce housing. I do think that that's a model that we need to blow up and really scale up throughout the state of California. And that is likely something that we'll continue to work on over the course of the next year. And just really excited about the opportunity to essentially match funding around the fact that in our carceral system today, and this is probably, I heard this probably in my first, 1 or 2 weeks in that 1% of the CDCR's budget goes towards rehabilitation in our carceral system, and which to me means that we have no ability for there to be stability in programming with community-based organizations coming in and building a pipeline to reentry for people who are in prison. And so we were able to secure $20 million there, but we need more, and it will continue to be a focus of mine moving forward. Oh, sorry, less than 1%. Max is correcting me. Goes towards rehabilitation.
Whoa, so low. Okay, so next slide.
2 other Assemblymember Bonta led budget victories I want to just quickly highlight is the legislature had a very aggressive climate change package, and included in that was a grant program that was created where we allocated $80 million to the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection for fire prevention grants. The East Bay Regional Park District reached out to Assemblymember Bonta and explained that one of the efforts the district is doing to address the issue of climate change and fire prevention is the removing of high-prone vegetation and replacing that with native fire-resistant species. But there's no money in the state to do the latter, which is replacing any vegetation that is removed with fire-resistant native species. And so the member rolled up her sleeve and pushed to make sure that of that $80 million that will be allocated for these grants, the East Bay Regional Park District will be able to apply for this grant money for the less fire-prone native vegetation replanting that they are looking to do to address the issue of fire and high-risk areas in the district. And lastly, the Oakland Airport reached out to Assemblymember Bonta about seeking assistance in recovering from the dramatic losses that resulted in the loss of passengers during the pandemic when just about everybody had to stay home. And that was something that she was also able to champion and win for the district.
And so I know that we have, thank you so much, Tomasa. And I know that we've shared out so much, some amazing legislation, budget victories. And so I just want to encourage you all, if you had any questions for us, you can scan this QR code and submit a question, but honestly, you can just chat us. And so I guess at this time, there was a couple questions that I did want to share out with the group. I want to start first with, since we were just kind of talking about this, the topic of, gun violence being just really one of the major priorities. Thank you, Ishmael, for your note. It just says here, we really want to partner with Assemblymember Bonta. They're connected with OUSD, and just really uplifting that, gun violence is a priority for many of the families, given that there was a recent school shooting, and that, it seems like, Ishmael is uplifting, perhaps for stricter gun laws. And so, Max, Assemblymember Bonta, did you want to share out anything to Ishmael's comment?
I will just share, I just posted in the note, Ishmael, you are right on point. I think one, you kind of talked about the teacher retention component, which I think is huge. It's we're facing a teacher retention crisis across the state. We know that we already have a critical need for retaining our teachers here in Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro in 8018. And I believe it's the case in the new part of 8018 in Emeryville come December, and that I'm hopefully will be honored to be able to serve again. And so that is an area of focus for me. I know that there's a lot of energy in the governor's office around that. And I'm very much looking forward to partnering and to developing out strategies to be able to do that. And you are absolutely right. Guns don't belong in schools. It should never be the case that a 12-year-old walks into a school and is shot and injured while they're trying to learn algebra. And we need to create a different reality for our kids. And so we will work tirelessly with you all. I think one of the prides that I get to have is I get to talk about our district and talk about the amazing organizations, frontline workers, advocates who are ensuring that a lot of this work is getting done. And I recognize that my job is really to just kind of lift up and do some blocking and tackling along the way, and making sure to create an opportunity for the things that we're doing here in our district get amplified, continue to get funded, built out, scaled up, and taken to the state, and also just making sure that we have direct impact in our district right now. I spent the morning with Council President Pro Tem Sheng Tao, talking about what it means to think about ending violence by investing in our parks and creating direct investment pipelines, and that means getting some budget wins, which we were thankful to be able to get. And it also just means making sure to be really, really strategic on the legislative side. And we don't talk about it enough, and I will kind of share this as my closing comments. We don't talk about it enough in the work that we do, but I want to draw back folks' attention to that constituent services and supports work that we did. The over 1,000 emails that were responded to, the several hundred cases just in EDD alone of people who are struggling. I want to share that I know that when people are calling into our office, we are sometimes and oftentimes the last line of defense when people are at their wits' end, where they've tried everything else and they're calling into their state assembly member and this office to seek recourse and to seek support. And we'll continue to do that work, take it incredibly seriously. We get to have some wonderful achievements on the legislative side and get all that energy and excitement and, quite frankly, ownership over that. And we get to have, be able to tout huge numbers in terms of the millions of dollars that we were able to get and secure for our district. And at the end of the day, we couldn't do it and shouldn't do it without making sure that we're keeping you all, the beautiful people of Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro centered and lifted up in that work. And so here we have one of my legislative icons, Barbara Lee, celebrating with me on my first day. She was a part of my swearing in. And I want to thank you all for helping me to keep focused and, most importantly, energized while we were duking it out in Sacramento for all things good. And of course, want to thank my amazing Assembly District 18 team. None of this happens without them staying up late and refining things and putting forward ideas and being willing to feel like they're knocking their heads against a wall sometimes for the kind of outcomes that they know that you deserve in this district. And I really want to thank them for lifting me up and for lifting our district up and centering us in the work that we do. So thanks to everybody.
Yep, thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, we did have a slide that, how to contact us, whether it's here in the district office or at the state office. I can't see it right now, but maybe Lynn, if you're able to drop in that info, or we can pull up that slide on how to contact us. We're available. both in the district and the capital. So we welcome your feedback and engagement. Please know that we will be sending out a newsletter that will include, clips from this evening's town hall. And then additionally, any questions that you may have, you can, contact us. So thank you so much for spending the evening with us. And that is all. Thank you, folks.